Chosen one, welcome, radiant warriors of truth and legacy. This moment right here, it's not random. It's divine alignment. You didn't stumble into this story. You were born to rewrite it. And trust me, the universe has been waiting for you to take your rightful place, not just at the table, but at the head of it. You've been underestimated, misunderstood, mislabeled. But what they didn't know is that pressure only made you sharper. You're not here by accident. You're here by assignment. And now, it's your time. The tables are turning, and the spotlight is shifting, not just on the lies, but on the legacy that was always meant to be yours. This is more than justice. This is restoration. This is your bloodline breaking cycles. This is your voice becoming the verdict. And whether they like it or not, you're not just part of the story anymore. You are the plot twist. You're the revelation they never saw coming. So take a deep breath, square your shoulders, and walk in with that quiet power only real ones carry. Because today isn't just about proving a point. It's about proving that no one can erase what was divinely written. Let's go. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. They tried to bury what was already etched into your path, as if your rightful place could be erased by silence and strategy. They maneuvered like chess players, guarding a throne they built on sand, shifting the rules mid-game to keep you off balance. But what they claimed as theirs never truly belonged to them. It was merely borrowed on borrowed time. There were no demands, no pleading on your part, only the quiet resolve of someone who knew the ground beneath their feet had always been theirs to stand on. Yet your clarity threatened them. They saw your composure as defiance, your questions as rebellion, and your presence as disruption. So they tried to cast you as an outsider in your own domain. Behind veiled smiles and closed doors, they wove their schemes, altering paths, rewriting histories, sealing deals in whispers they hoped would never echo. Their confidence wasn't strength, it was presumption, wrapped in layers of deception. They counted on confusion, on red tape, on your fatigue. But what they didn't count on was your patience, or how much you've sharpened your understanding in the shadows they created. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. Now the tides have shifted. What they thought would stay hidden is unraveling not with rage, but with precision. Not because you stooped to their level, but because you rose beyond it. The records they manipulated are now the very things turning against them. The game they played with veiled hands is now laid bare in full view. This was never about revenge, it was about restoration. And while they clung to illusions, you clung to truth. What they tried to gatekeep has returned to its rightful place, not because you stormed the gates, but because you knew they never had the key in the first place. They were the ones draining the well, yet they threw stones when you asked why the water was low. For years, they quietly siphoned what didn't belong to them, all while stitching a narrative that painted you as the opportunist. They fed rumors and smug remarks, claiming you only surfaced when there was something to gain, while conveniently forgetting how long you were left in silence, watching them enjoy what was never solely theirs to begin with. The trail of truth didn't shout. It whispered through balance sheets and hidden transfers, through overlooked figures and unspoken decisions. What they branded as your entitlement turned out to be their cover. While they adorned themselves in roles of responsibility and self-sacrifice, they were rerouting what was meant to be shared, stashing it in places they assumed no one would dare to check. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. They mocked your presence, calling it sudden. But it wasn't sudden, it was timed, it was deliberate, and it came armed with clarity. What broke the illusion wasn't noise or confrontation. It was data, records, timelines that revealed not only what they took, but how systematically they worked to conceal it. They underestimated the sharpness of your gaze. What you brought forward wasn't just evidence, it was accountability. They weren't ready for the exposure, for the conversations they thought would stay locked away, to be printed and dissected under legal scrutiny. What they masked as necessity was, in truth, indulgence, a pursuit of control disguised as stewardship, manipulation wrapped in civility. Now, stripped of their image, the truth has cast its own spotlight. The performance is over. They're not seen as wise guardians, but as quiet exploiters who dance through grief with open hands. This wasn't a takedown, it was a mirror. And it turns out, the reflection told a story no amount of spin could erase. They miscalculated you completely. While they placed bets on your confusion, you were learning the rules they tried to bury in fine print. They built their scheme on distraction, hoping grief would keep your head bowed, hoping complexity would lock the door behind you. But instead of retreating, you decoded every corner they thought too obscure for your attention. They mistook silence for ignorance. But in the quiet, you were gathering clarity. You took their playbook apart, piece by piece, not with noise, but with discipline. While they were busy coordinating misdirection, you were building a timeline, connecting subtle irregularities, catching contradictions they assumed would blend into the mess. You didn't show up unprepared. You arrived with evidence so aligned that every question became a corner they couldn't talk their way out of. Their assumptions became liabilities. Their confidence started to crack under the weight of their own signatures and mismatched dates. They aimed to confuse, but you moved with precision. This wasn't about rage, it was about resolve. No loud declarations, no chaos, just quiet facts stacked like bricks, forming a wall they couldn't climb. What was meant to intimidate became the foundation of their exposure, their secret handshakes, their rerouted trails, their reliance on you staying unaware. It all collapsed under your steady gaze. They didn't expect you to master the blueprint. That's where they lost. Their strategy relied on you staying uninformed, not realizing you'd grown sharper with every step. And now, the very tactics they used to hide are the same ones tying them to every move. The game has shifted, and the paper they once weaponized now spells out their consequences. They spun their version of the truth so tightly they thought it would never unravel. Every half-truth, every skewed memory, every carefully rehearsed deflection. They wrapped them in formal language and false confidence, stamping them with authority as if that would make them immune to scrutiny. But what they didn't anticipate was that their web of fiction would harden into something traceable. It wasn't just exposed, it was recorded, preserved, and secured in binding records they can no longer control or revise. What began as whispers and manipulations evolved into ink on pages that now sit in files, with signatures they cannot deny and statements that betray their own story. Their attempts to create confusion only led to clarity. In their haste to discredit, they documented their own deceit. What once lived in shadows now bears official markings, and no amount of charm or excuses can pry those documents from the truth they carry. Their tactics worked for a while. They convinced others you were chasing shadows. But the weight of real documentation is heavier than gossip. And now that weight is pressing down on their fabricated version of events. It's not about revenge. It's about what's irrefutably written down, time-stamped, catalogued, and placed under legal protection. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. They believed if they looked confident enough, no one would question the inconsistencies. But arrogance is not evidence, and what they scribbled in arrogance has become the very thing unraveling their mask. No courtroom favors the loudest lie, only the clearest record. And the clearest record is now pointing in one direction, and it's not yours. It turns out, the most damaging blows didn't come from confrontation, but from their own pen. Their downfall didn't need exposure, it simply needed time and the right lens. Now every forged claim, every false account, every deviation is locked in place, impossible to explain away. They wanted their words to be the final version. Instead, those words became proof of exactly what they were trying to hide. Quiet wasn't absence, it was intention. Every moment of stillness was another brick in a strategy they never saw forming. They thought silence meant surrender. But underneath that calm surface, you were archiving every move, logging every contradiction, and preparing every step without saying a word. They mistook the lack of reaction for passivity. Meanwhile, you were studying, not reacting, calculating, not retreating, aligning. Their chaos was loud. Your preparation was precise. Each conversation replayed in your mind became a note, each contradiction a marker. You weren't caught off guard. You were watching the storm form and noting where the cracks would start to show. They grew confident in your quiet. They assumed you wouldn't return. But the return didn't come with spectacle. It came with a case so thoroughly built, it didn't need defense. It stood on its own, built from facts they didn't think you had access to. And by the time they noticed the shift, it was no longer a matter of if. They were already surrounded by the truth they wrote themselves into. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. No shouting, no chaos, just undeniable structure. Every overlooked inconsistency pieced together like an architect sketching the outline of collapse. You didn't force a downfall. You simply held up a mirror, steady and silent, and let the reflection do the rest. They believed in noise as power, but you moved with something deeper, unshakable certainty. Not out to impress, not out to retaliate. You moved to restore what was manipulated and to remove what was false. And now, the hush they once ridiculed has become the echo that dismantles everything they tried to preserve. Stillness didn't mean you stopped. It meant you aimed. They mistook your resistance for rebellion, not realizing you were dismantling a legacy of silence that had haunted generations. This was never about property or possessions. It was about uprooting the quiet corruption passed down like an heirloom, cloaked in politeness and false pride. What looked like a legal matter on the surface was, at its core, a confrontation with a deep-rooted sickness, one that hid behind family rituals while rewarding cruelty, silencing the hurt, and calling it normal. For years, this pattern went unchecked, kept alive by those who benefited from the silence, those who weaponized respect to keep control unchallenged. The same voices that once told others to keep the peace were the ones stirring the conflict in shadows. But you didn't follow that script. You interrupted it. This was never about taking something. It was about ending something, something corrosive, something inherited but never chosen. And when you stepped forward, you didn't just face the problem. You cracked the seal on a pattern that fed on secrecy. That choice echoed far beyond the present moment. It was an interruption, not just for yourself, but for those who come after you. What came out wasn't just unfair contracts or hidden assets. It was the unveiling of favoritism, disguised as tradition, pain masked as duty, and control justified as care. You didn't just receive a verdict. You uncovered the cost of pretending, and then you chose to pay it in full to stop the cycle. What you changed wasn't just paperwork. It was the emotional blueprint, the unspoken code that dictated who had to shrink and who got to dominate. You tore that map in half, and in doing so, you built a different future, one not built on fear, one not passed down through manipulation. This wasn't a win, it was a transformation. The flame you lit didn't just expose the damage, it cleared the ground for something clean to grow. The next generation will not inherit the weight you dropped. The pattern is broken, and in its place, something honest begins. They engineered the perfect takedown, but now the spotlight has reversed its aim. From the beginning, they scrambled to rewrite the story, tossing out rumors like darts and hoping at least one would stick to your name. They were in a hurry to define you before anyone had the chance to hear your side, trying to taint the truth before it even surfaced. They called in favors, whispered distortions, built their entire narrative on exaggerations so they could point fingers before questions were asked. What they didn't plan for was your silence, measured, deliberate, and strategic. You didn't crash into their chaos. You watched. You waited. You let them keep talking while their own script unraveled. What gave them power at first, speed and volume, turned against them when the facts emerged. Not guesses, not drama, concrete records, timelines, evidence, items they had forgotten existed, resurfacing with surgical precision. While they performed, you built a case too solid for them to discredit. The louder they became, the clearer their intentions looked. Suddenly, the names they tried to keep clean began appearing in the places they never imagined. Official reports, formal investigations, signed statements they thought would never be read again. The narrative didn't just change, it collapsed. Their story now reads like a confession, their accusations looking more like deflections in hindsight. What was meant to be your downfall became their exposure. They weren't taken down by retaliation. They were swallowed by their own desperation to destroy what threatened their illusion. The scandal they tried to stage for you now stars them, framed by the evidence they left behind. There's no need to rewrite what happened. Their efforts to silence you are now written in ink, while the reputation they tried to shield has become the cautionary tale. They wanted to leave you with nothing but shame, but now their legacy is the one unraveling publicly. What they thought they were burying wasn't you, it was the truth. And now it has risen, louder than any lie they ever told. They weren't prepared for what authenticity sounds like when it walks into a room with nothing to prove. This wasn't a performance, and you weren't there for applause. The moment you spoke, it was clear. What you brought wasn't rehearsed emotion or polished rhetoric. It was lived reality, and it carried the gravity of every moment you had endured in silence. There was no dramatic display, no embellished story, just a steady voice filled with lived-through truth. one that cut through every false version presented before it. You didn't have to shout to be heard. The room leaned in because what you shared had roots. Every detail, every pause, carried evidence of survival, not theory. They expected a version of you they could dismiss, fragile, hysterical, uncertain. But what they encountered was a calm so steady it disrupted everything they tried to control. They thought your silence before meant you had no strength left. But when you finally spoke, the air shifted. Even those meant to remain neutral could feel it. You didn't need to paint a villain. You didn't even need to defend yourself. You simply brought the truth as it stood, untouched, unmoved, and unafraid. They could twist timelines and invent motives, but your presence exposed the gap between narrative and fact. What made your voice undeniable wasn't volume, it was resonance. It was the simple clarity that comes when someone isn't trying to win anything. They're just done hiding. That's why the truth stood taller than every tactic thrown at it. Because real stories don't need decoration. They carry their own rhythm. And that rhythm didn't just echo, it settled into the space, undeniable. The outcome was never shaped by sympathy, but by the quiet conviction that only truth, fully lived, can bring. You didn't need the gavel. The truth brought its own authority, and when it arrived, nothing else mattered. They walked in, wearing their roles like armor, convinced their names alone could protect them from being questioned. Reputation had always been their shield. They had titles to flash, positions to leverage, masks of influence they assumed no one would dare peel back. They miscalculated. What they wore as symbols of credibility became the first clues that something was off. Their confidence in status blinded them to the reality that power without integrity is just a mask waiting to be removed. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. While they believed their positions would place them above consequences, those very roles became a magnifying glass. The responsibilities they used to push others down are now the same ones being scrutinized with sharp detail. The false superiority that once gave them the room to maneuver in secret has turned into a list of actions under review. Their downfall didn't come from an outside attack, it rose from within. All the decisions they made while seated in authority are now being traced and documented, not with fear, but with clarity. Every signature is being unpacked, every directive re-evaluated. The weight of the titles they clung to now works against them. They had grown so used to admiration that they didn't recognize the quiet collapse of trust. Their downfall was not caused by the truth being shouted, it came from the truth being proven. The very labels they believed made them untouchable now serve as evidence of misuse, of cover-ups, of abuse veiled as leadership. What once served as protection now identifies them as the architects of betrayal. The illusion of power was never going to last. What exposed them wasn't revenge, it was the documentation they thought no one would ever question. Their names are no longer celebrated. They're indexed, documented, and examined. Control without conscience doesn't last forever. And now, the names they once flaunted are attached not to honor, but to evidence. They crafted their legacy on silence, sealing cracks with forced smiles and carefully choreographed interactions. For years, things were swept beneath the surface, where truth rotted quietly under layers of rehearsed normalcy. No one asked questions. It was easier that way, more polite to nod and play along than to challenge what everyone secretly knew was off. The discomfort was disguised as tradition. The manipulation was camouflaged as harmony. But something shifted. You didn't just trip over a hidden truth. You tore open a sealed chamber they hoped no one would touch. And when you did, what poured out wasn't just paperwork or property issues. It was the residue of generations trained to suppress the obvious. You unearthed what had been buried in plain sight. Favoritism codified in silence, betrayal framed as duty, and decisions masked as what's best for everyone. You walked through the unspoken boundaries that had kept so many quiet and brought to light the unfiltered truth no one else dared name. And when the mask fell, the impact wasn't subtle. It rattled through the entire structure like a fault line finally snapping. Their illusion of unity crumbled. The myths they curated collapsed under the weight of undeniable evidence. Those who once dismissed your concerns had to reckon with what they could no longer deny. What made this moment seismic wasn't rage, it was clarity. You didn't attack, you revealed. You didn't invent chaos, you exposed it. And in doing so, you gave the next wave of your lineage the one thing they were never meant to have: clarity over confusion, truth over performance. No more generations carrying shame they didn't cause. No more narratives passed down to protect those who never protected anyone else. You didn't just speak, you severed a lie that had masqueraded as legacy. And though they may resent you for it, somewhere deep down, even they know this reckoning was overdue. They didn't just sideline you, they erased you until it was time to divide what mattered. Suddenly, your name reappeared, not to honor your place, but to conveniently exclude it. The fight wasn't about an item, it was about identity, about whether or not you were allowed to matter in a space you were born into. They walked around you as if you were invisible. Your pain minimized, your voice muted, your worth negotiable. You weren't supposed to ask questions. You were supposed to accept your absence as fact. But when you chose to stand, you weren't just challenging their claim. You were demanding to exist without permission. You weren't there to beg for a portion. You were there to be acknowledged as whole. This was never about wealth. It was about the refusal to be erased from a lineage that only remembered you when it needed you to disappear again. Your resistance wasn't loud, it was firm. You didn't need to argue to prove you're right. You carried that truth in your presence. They didn't expect you to speak. They certainly didn't expect you to speak with such certainty. And once you did, there was no returning to the way things were. You weren't reclaiming a share. You were reclaiming your humanity, the part they edited out to keep their version of the story intact. But now, their version is no longer the only one that exists. Your words have been entered into record. Your place, once ignored, has been inscribed where it can't be erased. You didn't fight to take what was theirs. You fought to end the illusion that you didn't belong. And that was the one thing they couldn't control. Now, whatever the outcome, the truth has been spoken. And this time, it has a name.